everybody, welcome back to the I Play 2 podcast. I'm your host, Rob Adler. This week, former National Hockey League player Mark Alt joins the show. While being drafted by the Carolina Hurricanes, Mark made his NHL debut with the Philadelphia Flyers, as well as also suiting up for the Colorado Avalanche and Los Angeles Kings. While playing for Minnesota in college, Mark was a defenseman on the 2012 squad that made the Frozen Four. In high school, in St. Paul, Minnesota, Mark was a two-sport star, quarterbacking Cretin-Durham Hall to a state championship. His father, John Alt, was a two-time Pro Bowl offensive lineman and is in the Kansas City Chiefs Hall of Fame. And Mark's brother, Joe Alt, is a potential first-round draft pick in the upcoming NFL draft. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Rob. Appreciate it.
No problem. My first question is, how did you end up playing hockey?
Oh boy, that's a long story. I grew up playing all sports. One of the things I tipped my cap to my dad on growing up, he wanted us to try everything. And the older I got, he just said, if you don't like it, you can drop it. And so kind of started off playing everything, but there was always a little bit more of an emphasis on football for sure. And hockey was something I kind of just did on my own. I go down to the rink close to the house, bring my skates down and skate for hours, and something I truly love. So when the time came, I think it really ended up being just that. I just wanted to go play hockey, something I knew I was good at, loved to play, and yeah, the rest is history.
When you told your folks that you were going to play hockey over football, what was the reaction to that like?
It wasn't great. Some rough conversations in the alt house in my high school years, especially up into signing day. I always tell the story, and it's not an exaggeration. Everyone thinks it would be my dad that was pushing it. My mom was just as bad. I had offers to play football, and my dad played at the University of Iowa. That was kind of like the plan. So I got a scholarship to Iowa. So for the month leading up to signing day, my mom wore Iowa gear head to toe for an entire month leading up to signing day. And then on signing day, I went and signed with the Gophers. So it was some tough times in the alt house there for a little bit. But after a few months, they came around and jumped on board.
Well, you went to Minnesota to play hockey. Iowa-Minnesota rivalry is known for the Floyd of Rosedale, and for folks listening who don't know what that is, it's basically a trophy of a brass pig. I gotta believe that going to play on the other side of that rivalry was a little difficult early on.
Yeah, not only did I not pick the correct sport that I was supposed to play, but I also went to the school rival. So I kind of doubled down there with my dad. And like I said, it was rough for a few months, but he did come around to it. He did end up being a little bit of a hockey fan.
Being a two-sport star in high school, how hard was it to balance your schedule, not just so much from sport to sport, but also with your academics?
I always found that high school and college, I think that intertwining athletics into school, it always seemed to benefit me. I like being busy and knowing that, hey, I'm done with practice now. I go home. I have to get my homework done because I need to get to bed at a decent hour because we have a game tomorrow or whatever it was. I kind of enjoyed having the full schedule because it just seemed to keep me on task, and I'm a task-oriented person, so I really enjoyed having both in my life at the time. At some points when they start to cross over in the fall, it gets to be a little bit hectic with tryouts starting for hockey while the football season's going on. Got a little crazy there for a little bit, but yeah, I didn't mind managing it. It kept me on task for sure.
Before we go full bore into hockey, what was it like leading the school to a state championship?
Winning it was still to this day one of my favorite sports memories of my career. That year was kind of nuts in and of itself because I was playing fall hockey in the Elite League in Minnesota, which this story goes too far. But again, my dad told me not to play in the hockey league because it's football season. So my mom is secretly driving me to these hockey games down at Shattuck St. Mary's, break my collarbone mid-season. So then I'm out for a few weeks. So my dad's fit to be tied. Come back. I'm still kind of laboring with my collarbone. And as the season went on, it was kind of just getting through it. And then to finally get to the championship game, I ended up breaking it again in the third quarter. And come over to the sideline, look at my dad, and he's like, what are you going to do? I was like, I guess I'm going to keep playing. So finished the game with a broken collarbone. And it was just the culmination of that whole season really was one of my favorite memories of all my sports, just because it was a lot of adversity. And we just had such a great team and a bunch of guys who just kind of pulled together and loved the game. And we ended up winning the whole thing. So it was a blast.
How did you play through the pain of a broken collarbone?
I don't know. I don't think I could do that today. I look back and I was like, trying to throw a football with a broken collarbone I doubt it felt good at the time. I think there was so much adrenaline in that game. I just kind of powered through it, but it was crazy.
When it comes to football or hockey, how do you end up navigating the day-to-day pain? Because as the season goes on, regardless of which season it is, all those injuries just pile up.
I feel like earlier in my career, I think this is true for everybody, you recover so much faster. And the first few years, it's like it didn't matter if you're playing a back to back or if you got dinged up the night before, it just didn't bother you as much. And all of a sudden, you get into your late 20s and early 30s, you just do not recover the same. And you kind of get these nagging injuries that just never go away throughout the season. So, I mean, a lot of ice baths, a lot of therapy. You just spend a lot more time on the training table than you do in the weight room. That's just what I found. So it was a lot more of just rehab, keeping the body healthy as much as possible. I mean, you just know as an athlete that that's just something you have to play through. It's the nature of the job. And so you kind of get used to it.
With the trainers and the physios that each team has, it's kind of a job that a lot of people I don't think understand. Could you kind of talk a little bit about how much they kind of keep not just you, but your teammates and everyone else kind of whole throughout the year?
I was fortunate in my career that just about every team organization I landed on had phenomenal training staff, and the amount of work they do, not only on the guys before and after practice, but it's a full day job. They're helping with gear, they're helping with cleanup. It was a full-time gig, underappreciated, and it's a tough job, but it's rewarding because they're a part of the team just as anybody else. And so the wins matter for them too. And that was always the thing that kind of surprised me, is how happy those trainers would get when we'd win games, and you could see it when they lost, like it mattered. So that was cool. They really felt like they were part of the team, just like players were.
In high school, I don't think a lot of people, unless folks live there, understand just how big hockey is in Minnesota high school. Could you kind of describe what it was like to play high school hockey in Minnesota, the rivalries, how much the fans get into it?
I didn't realize how big it was until I guess I got to college maybe, and then into pro. Because in Minnesota, you're in a bubble. You think that this is how it is everywhere. And it is so unusual for the state to have such competitive talent within a very small area. And then you go outside, it's like other states aren't having high school tournaments like Minnesota. We don't know that because we're all stuck in the Minnesota bubble. But all of a sudden, my sophomore year of college, I'm going down to the XL Energy Center and we're playing in front of 18,000 people, and your mind's blown. You think it's cool, but you don't realize that's not happening other places. There's the junior programs and the academies and all that sort of thing, but it's special. And then playing against your buddies. A lot of times you grow up in the same area. You might go to a private, your buddy might go to a public school, and all of a sudden you're playing each other over the weekend, and it makes for some really fun hockey. It's a special community in Minnesota in that regard. It's hockey based. It's the state of hockey. So it's really fun up here.
And you're playing against your buddy that you grew up with. What's the trash talking like?
It was pretty bad. And I know for a fact he kind of prepped his team beforehand to tell them, because we grew up and we played every day for 10 years. And he knew all my tendencies, all my tricks in my bag. And so I think he ended up telling his whole team like what to look out for, which I knew. And so I had to change my game up a little bit, but there was plenty of trash talking and I knew what was going on, but it was fun.
Throughout your career, what was the best chirp you heard directed at you?
Oh, this one comes right off the top of the head. So not so funny, but I was born with a cleft lip and palate. So my nose is a little bit not as pronounced as most people's. Underneath my lip, it looks a little different. So I have more of a flat face, if you will. I'm old enough now to where it doesn't bother me. But when I was younger, obviously I got bullied. It stunk. But in my pro career, that was kind of a focal point for any of the chirps I received. And so we're playing in Colorado in the American League. And I was lining up for a face-off right in front of, I can't remember whose team it was, but right in front of their bench. All of a sudden I hear from their bench, they go, "Hey, all, you look like a hammerhead shark." I turned over to their bench. I go, "Well, am I a good looking hammerhead shark?" And I got them back a little bit because then they all started dying laughing. So sometimes they sting a little bit, but that's just the hockey world. Then you go out and try to find them and lay a big check. I didn't mind that at all.
I was just going to ask, I said hammerhead shark. I was like, did you lay the guy out next time you was on the ice?
Oh, yeah, I found his number. I remember it well.
Who are some of the idols in sports that you looked up to, be it football, basketball, hockey, whoever?
I was fortunate in my situation, having my dad play for the Chiefs, that Joe Montana would come to our house in the summer and kind of spend some time with us each summer in the off season. So, I mean, for me, it was Joe Montana. I love football. I love playing quarterback. Joe hung a tire in my backyard and told me to throw 100 footballs through it every day. So it's terrible because you're young, you don't even understand at the time who Joe Montana is. You know the name a little bit, you go to the games, but not until you get older do you realize, holy smokes, Joe Montana hung a tire in my backyard to throw a football through. So he was always my biggest idol growing up.
Yeah, as a Dallas Cowboys fan, as much as I respected Joe Montana, there's a certain play that I choose not to remember. It broke 7-year-old me's heart.
Yep, I think I know which one you're talking about.
Growing up around an NFL locker room, what was it like to kind of get that first-hand experience, seeing how players interact, what they have to do to stay at that level? What lessons did you take from that?
I just remember being in awe, going down in the locker room, and when you're a kid and you're seeing just how big these guys are, and you have the privilege of sitting down in my dad's stall and kind of looking around and seeing the work that they put in was pretty special. And I don't know how much of that registered with me later on, but I just remember going down there and being like, this is pretty awe-inspiring to see these guys and how hard they work. And then to be on the ground level of the field and realizing that they're going out there and playing on Sundays in front of that crowd, it does give you an impression of what they're doing is pretty special. So I was very fortunate to have that view as a kid.
So how did your family end up making it back to Minnesota?
Both my parents are from Minnesota originally. They're both from Columbia Heights, and towards the later part of my dad's career, they ended up getting a house here in Minnesota, and they'd spend their off seasons here too, but kind of knew that the transition was happening. So we'd spend the off season here and then go down to Kansas City for my dad's season and then come back. And towards the end, we just made the move back officially to Minnesota.
For people who've never been, what's a Minnesota winter like to go through?
Horrific. It's dark, it's gray, it's cold. I say that because I've had the fortune of playing in so many different cities the last few years, and two of which were in California. So coming back last year to my first full Minnesota winter in a long time was a rough transition, to put it lightly. Just getting used to leaving in the morning, having it dark, coming home, it's dark, and it's just cold the entire time. It's a rude awakening, but now going in the second year, I'm getting a little more accustomed to it, but it's tough.
I can't imagine you needed a snow shovel in San Jose very often.
It's funny, I didn't, and because I wasn't here during the season, I didn't have one at home. So the first snow comes that season, and I'm sitting there with a broom in my driveway trying to brush off the snow. My neighbors are laughing at me, and my wife comes to me and she's like, "Yeah, it's probably time we gear up for winter." And I was like, "Yeah, snowblower, shovel, all the above." So we're getting acclimated.
Before we move on to your college and pro career, I have one more Minnesota local question for you.
Yeah.
And that is, where's your favorite place to get a Juicy Lucy?
I'm biased, so I'm going with the Nook. I went to high school at Cretin. There's the Nook across the street. I know it's not one of the originals. It's not one of the big names, but I think the Nook's got the best Juicy Lucy.
For folks who don't know what that is, would you mind explaining what a Juicy Lucy is?
It's one of the best cheeseburgers you've ever had in your life. They take two patties, put cheese inside the middle, and cook it together. So when you bite into it, it's molten cheese. And you got to wait a while because it is unbelievably hot, but the cheese is completely melted on the inside of the two patties, and it is something special.
I remember when I was in St. Paul, that was something that I had to do just to say that I'd done it, and I'm so happy I did it.
Yeah, it's a must have if you come up here for sure.
It's one of those things that you just don't get anywhere else.
No, and the first time you have it, you just take a big bite out of it, and the cheese burns your tongue, your mouth, and then drips all over your shirt. So you learn your lesson quick.
Yeah, that might have happened to me.
Yep, they are so good.
We talked a little bit about your recruiting process, but in terms of the hockey side, what was the recruiting process was like for you?
Yeah, that was a little bit strange as well. I got an offer from the University of Minnesota my sophomore year of high school. And at the time, you're just so excited to get an offer to play sports in college. I started getting some other offers from other schools around the country. And at the time, it's like you're a Minnesota kid, you get an offer to be a Gopher, and you don't really have any other option. So that early in my high school career, I decided that I wanted to go to Minnesota and knew a bunch of the guys that were going in there with me. So it was a no-brainer. And toured the campus, met a bunch of the guys, went out to a few skates, and knew that's where I wanted to be. So pretty easy decision from that standpoint.
Being a Minnesota kid, putting on the Gophers jersey for the first time, what was that first game like, just being able to wear it?
I remember just standing there holding up a jersey. Couldn't believe I put it on because I wore them as a kid and you just know the colors, but then to have your own with your name and your number on the back, it's like no other feeling. And I think anybody that played at the University of Minnesota can attest to that. It's the M. So First time I was just sitting in the locker room, I was like, wow, this is mine. I get to put it on. And not for pictures or anything else. I'm going out to play. So that's when all the nerves kicked in, but it was a very special moment.
At Minnesota, what was your favorite memory as a player there?
Oh, I think when we beat North Dakota, it was a regular season game, but we had a back to back with North Dakota at home, and we beat North Dakota in overtime. And I don't think I've ever heard Mariucci as loud as it was that day. It was incredible. And we all ran out of there on a complete high, and it was so much fun. We had so many good games when I was there in the Frozen Four and the WCHA final, but for some reason that game sticks out to me because we just hated each other so much that it goes in overtime. It couldn't have been any better. And I think Kyle Rouse scored the game-winning goal. So it was a tough one not to remember.
A little while back, I had Jordan Parise on who played at North Dakota. And afterwards, we talked a little about the North Dakota-Minnesota rivalry. Would you kind of go a little bit more into just how deep that rivalry runs?
I don't think it gets much deeper in college sports than it does with those two schools. And growing up as a Gopher fan, it's kind of in your DNA to hate North Dakota. And then when you actually get to go and play there, and I think I realized it when I went up to North Dakota to play, and you're in the hotel lobby and the fans are screaming at you on the way out to the game and the way back. And I'm in the penalty box, and the guy who's sitting outside has like a folder, and he's going through each player and the dirt he has on him, and he's giving me a hard time. I can't remember about what, but these guys really hate us. So it runs deep, but it's why I made those games so much fun.
On that Frozen Four team, on defense, you guys were loaded. I remember Nate Schmidt, and I think Justin Hull was on that team. I'm thinking maybe Seth Helgeson, although don't quote me on that. But that was kind of an all-star cast on defense, which all those guys, including yourself, played in the NHL. What was it like to kind of play with all these guys who ended up having pretty decent pro careers?
It was awesome. And I think we just made each other that much better in college because there's a little bit of competition there. And guys like Nate Schmidt, he's one of the coolest stories because he came on kind of later in college and all of a sudden it clicked for him. And that was it. He was off to the races. And we all kind of just push each other throughout our college years, not even really knowing, at least in my eyes, I wasn't focused on the future, but just pushing each other throughout the season to get where we wanted to go. And I think that's why we had so much success. Yeah, it was a special decor for sure.
As a hockey fan myself, even though he's never played for my beloved Leafs, one of the guys that I love to watch is Eric Holla. Speed and his willingness to get the puck. What was it like to have him as a teammate?
Eric was always special. The first day he showed up, he just had a different style. Obviously, being from Finland, he's got the European touch, played a little bit in the USHL. But I just remember when he came to Minnesota, you could tell on the ice how different of a player he was, just because it didn't look like some kid that came from Minnesota high school hockey. And he was so gifted with his hands. I mean, he had everything. He had speed, he had the hands, he had the shot. And very fortunate to look back and say that I played with him because he's had a heck of a career in the NHL and he's a phenomenal player.
That 2012 ride to the Frozen Four, what are some of your favorite memories just on the way there?
The whole thing was special. I just remember there being a lot of pressure. The Minnesota Gophers, we had a lot of expectations that season, rightfully so. We had a great team. And you look back and it's like, man, I wish we could have done more. But the ride getting there, I mean, every single win we had leading up to that was a blast. And like I said, we were such a tight-knit group and we're having so much fun doing it that it just made the experience all the better. Again, that's another eye-opening experience to go down to Tampa and play in the Frozen Four against some pretty stacked teams at the time. That was part of our problem. We're playing BC, who wasn't short on talent either. So it was really fun.
What was it like to go play in Tampa?
It was strange. We fly down there and they're giving us oranges as we're getting off on the tarmac and it's hot and it's getting warmer back up where we're playing in the spring anyway. But to go down there and basically be on the beach playing in an NHL arena was a strange feeling. But we traveled so well that year. Gopher fans always traveled so well. So it made it a ton of fun to have all our fans there. And the atmosphere, the job they did setting up the Frozen Four was great. There was so much hype around that Frozen Four that it was just a blast.
Did you get a chance to go to the beach?
Well, after I was too mad and before I was getting ready. So no, I didn't get a chance, but I would have.
I know losses aren't fun to talk about, but what did you learn as a player and as a teammate from that loss that helped you in your pro career?
I think the biggest was just opportunity and not letting things slip. And I feel like that was a big missed opportunity for us. And it's one of those games when you come in afterwards and you're like, I never want to feel this way again. And that's something that sticks with you. And so throughout my career, every time you get in one of those playoff, those big game situations, in the back of your head, you're thinking, don't let this happen again. And I think it just pushes you and propels you to play better and harder. So that was one where it was like, man, it was right there at our fingertips. We let it slide. And so I always kept that with me.
You said that it was a close-knit team. Who are some of the guys maybe that you still keep in contact with now, just every now and again to drop a text?
I see the guys, especially when I was playing, we're on different teams, but Minnesota guys are tight knit. They stay in Minnesota. So Nick Bukestad, Nate Schmidt, those are good guys that I would see in the summers, and we'd always stay close. And then weddings come up and we're all back together, and that gets a little crazy, but we've been a good group to be around.
While you were in college at Minnesota, you were drafted by Carolina, but you're right to get traded to Philadelphia. Where were you when you heard that, and what was your reaction?
I was in my apartment living with three other teammates at the time, and I think one of them saw something maybe on Twitter early on, and then I got a call and a voicemail from the Hurricanes kind of saying you've been traded. Didn't know who it was from. And then obviously get on the phone with my agent and all that kind of stuff. But I was completely shocked. I was shocked, but I also wasn't really paying attention to that stuff at the time. Yeah, you get drafted and you know who has your rights and where you might be going if you do play pro. None of that was really in my frame of view at the time. I was just focused on being a Gopher. I thought I'd stay there for another year, and all of a sudden things shake up and I'm with Philadelphia. So it was kind of a strange thing to happen, but it was kind of an introduction to pro sports, because similar things like that happened to me throughout my career, where you put on waivers, picked up by another team. So you kind of get used to that shuffle around, but that was really my first taste of it. And you just kind of realize like you're just another player, and there's a lot of teams and there's a lot of movement, and you just kind of go with the flow.
I talked a little bit about this with Brendan Mickelson, but when you're put on waivers or you're traded, how hard is it just to pick up, go, and get acclimated with your new situation?
It's difficult. It's a shock. The situation I'm talking about is when I was with the Flyers and we're coming up on the trade deadline, and I had the conversation with the GM, hey, we're going to put you on waivers, basically on paper, in the case that the Phantoms make the playoffs. You're not going anywhere. You still practice. Everything's the same. So I went out for morning skate. Halfway through the skate, one of the trainers comes and he starts waving at me. He's like telling me to get off the ice. Like, hey, I just want to let you know you've been picked up by the Avalanche. Go back to the hotel, pack your stuff. And looking back on it, it's a complete whirlwind. My now wife was back in Philadelphia. My truck was at the airport. All I had with me was my bag of clothes that I brought for the road trip. So all of a sudden I'm going to the airport with no clothes, no nothing, out to Colorado where I'd never been. And all of a sudden the next morning I'm skating with the Colorado Avalanche in practice. And I don't have any belongings. Wife's not there. It's just like, holy smokes, how did I get here? But it's like one of those things where you just kind of have to learn and adapt. And nobody's going to feel sorry for you. I mean, you got to just get up the next morning and go to practice, learn new systems. So those first couple of weeks are hard, and it's definitely a huge adjustment, but it's just the nature of the business.
Oh, how did your wife end up joining you in Colorado? Did she have to drive cross country?
No, I flew her out, but I mean, she had to go pick up my truck and then go pack up my hotel that was in Philadelphia, drive all my stuff back to Allentown where we had an apartment. I mean, logistically that year I was all over the place. So I feel bad for her in that regard, is that she was always picking up the pieces. But once she got things squared away, she flew out and stayed with me in the hotel.
Other than being made famous in a song by Billy Joel, what was Allentown as a city like to play in?
Allentown was great. And I had the fortune of playing there in the inaugural season. So there was so much excitement about having a hockey team there, brand new rink, brand new facilities, and people just went nuts for it. It's Philly, so you have that attitude, and then they love hockey out there in a cool city. So made for an awesome environment, and we had a really great team that year and the years following. So it was a ton of fun.
When you get to Colorado, you're at that first practice, you kind of got a preview of what MacKinnon and Rantanen and those guys were going to be. What was it like to see those guys at a very young age?
I was stunned, to be honest. I'd played with a lot of great guys in my career all across the board, but getting into that practice, the first thing that stuck out was how fast it was. They were a team built on speed, and not just with their feet, with their hands, with everything. And I just remember being at altitude, getting up and down the ice, and having those guys whipping by me was a huge shock to the system. Completely different style of hockey. And then you just notice the skill level is so high there. And it was at the time, it just felt like a different brand of hockey. And so seeing those guys go to work and getting to be able to lace up the skates with them, it was pretty special.
You mentioned this playing at altitude. How much of an adjustment was that for you? Because I'm guessing you hadn't done that a whole lot before.
No, and I don't like this argument. Some guys are like, I don't notice a thing. Some guys are like, I can't breathe. And most people are like, no, it doesn't affect me. It affected me. I remember the first skate I was out there, I was scratched, I think the first night or the second night. And I was out there after pregame skate. Obviously, they put the guys through a little skate afterwards. And I remember having the worst headache, trying not to throw up. And it wasn't even anything like overly tough. And it takes like, I don't know, 4 or 5 days to feel like normal. You think you're in shape, and then you go out there and you can't get any air. Some guys say it doesn't bother them, but it definitely bothered me.
Did you notice it more when you would go on the road and then come back?
I noticed it when I was in the American League in Colorado with the Eagles because you get accustomed to it. So I think it's a massive advantage. I mean, we knew that if we got up on a team after the second period going into the third, we had better lungs, we had better legs. And so we use that to our advantage. And I can't tell you how many games we had my years with the Eagles where you just had so much more gas in the tank for that third period that you're like, all right, we can close this thing out because we got the win. And then on the flip side of that, you go on like a long road trip down to California and you play there for a few days and you come back and you're like, wow, did I just lose it? Because it takes you a while to adjust back to it. So it always affected me. I don't know if it was the same for everybody, but I like to use it to our advantage when we were there.
And any advantage you can get in pro sport, you use it whenever you can.
Absolutely. I think Colorado's got a little advantage out there.
Speaking of the Eagles, you were there also for their inaugural season, and you were named the first captain in franchise history. What was it like to be bestowed that honor?
That was just very special. I've been working my way up in the American League, getting some games in the NHL, and got to the Eagles. And they told me that early on when I got there. They had some veteran guys, and looking back, kind of surprised that they had offered me that captainship. But looking back at my career, it was got to be my 2 favorite years of hockey. We had special groups of guys getting it thrown in that leadership role really for the first time and kind of going down that whole path. It was special. I took it seriously and I enjoyed my time there. And I think that's probably the most growth I had throughout my career were those 2 years in Colorado, being a captain and kind of learning the ropes of what that meant. And you're the intermediary between the coaches and the players and a lot more stuff to deal with off the ice, but I enjoyed it. And like I said, I grew a lot from it.
Speaking of off the ice, you were the Eagles nominee for the AHL Man of the Year in 2019-2020. Could you kind of talk a little bit more about some of the charity work you did and some of the kids you worked with?
That was another great thing about Colorado is they had so many opportunities for us, whether it was at the Humane Society or visiting a children's hospital. They did a great job, and most teams do. Don't get me wrong. Everyone's really good about it, but I felt like in Colorado, that was a tight-knit community, and they just had so many opportunities for us to get out in the community, and I just liked doing it. So, I mean, I really liked the hospital visits, the Humane Society, whatever they had that came through that year, I tried to jump on board, and I had a great time doing it.
Do you ever keep in contact with any of the kids that maybe you came across? I read a couple of articles that the family talked about how great you were to them.
Yeah, maybe not as recently, but definitely after the fact. Because when you're a captain, you're doing stuff after the game or in between periods or after practice, you're meeting these families. And like I said, it's such a tight-knit community. They're coming every game. You're seeing them all the time. So anytime you ran into them, it was like, yeah, you just have a regular conversation. And it was a really special place for me.
Away from the rink, but with the team, be it college, pro, high school, you ever have any funny stories like a bus breaking down, you get caught in traffic, something like that?
Well, all the above. When you say bus breaking down, it's my first year pro. And this was kind of a shock to the system because you're going from, and it sounds strange, but you're going from Minnesota to professional hockey. You end up in Adirondack, New York, playing the American League, kind of a smaller, dumpier rink, and basically just traveling all over upstate New York. And one of our road trips, probably halfway through the year, in the middle of the bus, and all of a sudden everyone starts smelling smoke. I'm like, okay, great, the bus is on fire. So we all load off. Sure enough, the front wheel had been rubbing on the rim, so that had kind of caught fire. It was kind of smoking, so we were basically shut down. We were in the middle of nowhere, upstate New York, and we stood out in the snow for about an hour and a half because we were so far away from any other bus depot. That's how long it's going to take to get us. While we're standing out there, the guys start wandering into the woods. They start going all over the highway. Well, about a half mile down the road, one of the guys found a dead bear. So then the entire team's standing around messing with this dead bear on the side of the road. I was like, what am I doing here? So yeah, there was plenty of that throughout my career. Just too much time with the guys on the bus or the plane, and things are bound to happen.
I'm imagining a hockey team poking around with maybe a stick to a dead bear.
That's exactly what you think it would look like, and that's what was happening. I mean, like you would have thought we found a pot of gold, and guys are sitting there poking this dead bear on the side of the road as we're waiting for a bus for 2 hours to come get us in nowhere, New York.
I remember once when I was living in Connecticut, and I lived in an area that had black bears. So I'd be driving home, and there was a church parking lot, and you'd see all these parishioners on Sunday at like 11:45 that are standing waiting to go to their cars, and nobody's leaving because there's this bear just foraging through a trash bin in the parking lot.
Yeah, we were lucky this one had passed because that would have been an even bigger issue if they had found a live bear. So I'm glad that one was just in the ditch.
When you were playing in Adirondack and in the AHL, as you mentioned, some of the arenas aren't as modern as others. What was the adjustment like going from place to place? And sometimes you didn't have the facilities maybe you had at other places.
It's the crazy thing about that league. I saw it then and I saw it my last few years with the growth of these teams and these organizations and some of the facilities that they're building. Like I said, Allentown, state of the art, in my opinion. It basically was an NHL rink, and then you can all of a sudden hop on a bus, and not to throw anybody under the bus, but you can go to like Binghamton, and that was my least favorite place to play. Just small town, upstate New York. I mean, pretty close to your public rinks in Minnesota, some of them. So every place you go, it's a new challenge, and every rink is so different that you just kind of have to learn to adjust. As you play throughout your career, you kind of play everywhere, so you know what you're getting into. But sometimes you're in the state-of-the-art brand new facility in Henderson, or you're up in Binghamton, New York, and they're two polar opposite rinks. So it's an interesting league in that regard.
Did you enjoy playing in the shopping mall in Hartford?
Yeah, that one's different. 2 times when I was going down into that facility, our bus driver somehow mismanaged this very tight alleyway to get down to where the buses park, and he clipped the back window and shattered it all over the guys sitting in the back seats. So that was always an interesting one if we were going to be able to get in and out of there safely.
So usually the veterans sit in the back. I'm guessing the rookies sat in the back after that going there.
Yeah, we might have switched. All of a sudden we're going to Hartford. It's like, all right, rookies in the back, bucket hitting the glass.
I've been to that arena a few times. I used to live just west of Hartford. And that was just the oddest thing. It's like, you're going to the mall. Oh, by the way, we're going to go watch a game.
And it doesn't make sense, but still another fun place to play. In my opinion, it was a little bit big for the American League just because they always have to dark out the top bowl, but they did well with the fans, and it was a fun place.
I don't know if you ever played against Nolan Baumgartner. He was a coach in the AHL forever as well, so you might have been on the other end. But he actually once tossed me a puck in that arena. I still have it.
Oh, nice.
After Colorado, you signed with the Kings organization. How come you left Colorado?
There's more contract stuff. Hindsight 2020, I don't know. Did I make the right decision? When you get offered a contract by the LA Kings, that's another one where you're like, ooh, that'd be kind of fun. And it was at that point in my career where I probably want another shot at the NHL, and there was an opportunity there to maybe get some games, and decided to go to LA. And that was fun too.
I know you didn't play a lot with the Kings, but what was it like to have the opportunity, I guess, maybe more so in practices, to watch somebody like Drew Doughty ply his trade?
Again, it's like when you run into a MacKinnon, especially now that you're talking about defensemen, so you're like, this guy not only defends as well as he does, but then he has the skill of a very prolific forward. He's a unicorn. I mean, it's strange to have both, but he was also just a phenomenal human being. I mean, one of the best guys in the locker room, super outgoing, super talkative. I actually sat next to him in the locker room, so he was always giving me a hard time, which was fun. But he was a guy that I intentionally tried to hang around as much as I could on the ice, watching him, the drills he would do before practice, messing around, because you knew he had something different. And if you could just take a fifth of that, you could maybe have something to work on. So another special guy to be around.
Speaking of defensemen, we haven't really talked about this. Can you kind of talk about the communication with your partner on the ice in terms of how you know where each other needs to be, whether it's verbal, nonverbal?
I'll admit this was something that I didn't pick up really until I got to the pro level. College, you have calls and things are pretty much structured out for you. When I got to Adirondack, the 6 games I played after my college season. My D partner was Andreas Lilia. I don't know if you remember that name.
I remember Lilia with Detroit, if I remember right.
Yes. He comes up to me before the game and he's like, "What's your nickname?" And I go, "What?" And he goes, "Well, what do you want me to call you when I'm talking to you?" And I was like, "Oh, you can call me Alti or All, whatever you want." And he's like, "Okay. And what kind of tone should I be saying it in?" And he was so serious and so dedicated to like our communication piece. It was like new to me. It was like he really wanted to make sure that we understood each other on the ice and we talk all the time. And so that was kind of my introduction to it. And then as your career goes on, you just know that it's such a pivotal piece of the game with you and your partner. And by the end, when you get better at it, it's a full blown conversation the entire game. And that's how it should be. It takes a long time to get to that, but that's really ultimately what makes a good D pairing is that communication and kind of knowing where each other are. And there's guys that it works better than others with, but it's something that I found in my career was super beneficial. And like I said, I learned it at an early stage of my pro career, but something I worked on constantly.
Who was the most enjoyable defense partner you played with at any level?
I would say a good friend of mine now still is Anton Lindholm. I played with him for 2 years in Colorado. And at the time when I first got there, we're kind of fighting for a job on the Avs. So he'd be in, I'd be in. We kind of go back and forth. And we spent 2 years on the Eagles together. And we were a pretty lethal D pairing because of that communication piece. We were friends off the ice. And it was strange because even though we were kind of fighting for the next call up, we kind of understood it between each other and we're still close friends. And we just played well together and very complimentary in our styles. So it made for a fun 2 years of hockey.
With his European background, and I think he's still playing in Europe, I think he's playing in Sweden right now.
Yep.
The defense style in Europe, especially in Sweden, is a little bit more freewheeling in terms of the way they play defense in comparison to where North Americans learn how to play defense. How were you guys able to mesh?
Well, I think it was just complimentary. And then I learned a lot from his style of play, and I think he learned a little bit from mine too. But there was times where I knew that European style would kick in and he'd kind of take off of the puck and I'd know to hang back and vice versa. But we were both pretty sound defensively. So we always knew we had the other one to rely on if one was going to take a shot or step up into a play. So we kind of figured each other out over time. So I just adapted to his style. He would adapt to mine and became very complimentary. We did a good job.
One of the things that I think kind of gets overlooked is that whole teammate aspect, regardless of whether you're talking defense partner, forward. Everybody's all into stats and advanced stats, but none of those necessarily bring wins and losses.
Correct. Something I learned and I'll stand by throughout my career. And I hate hockey cliches more than anything, but the most success I ever had, and it wasn't necessarily with the most talented teams, was on teams that had a buy-in and everybody actually wanted to win together and do it as a team. It means something. And those long playoff runs, I always, and I'll still feel that if everybody is on the same page, they want the same thing, they're not too concerned about getting called up, my individual stats, or where everything's at, those teams succeed. And they're the ones that make the long runs and a lot of times win. So it's something that takes a while to learn. But there's times in my career where we start focusing on, I don't have enough points or I need more assists. And every time I did that, things went south. My defensive game fell apart. I started playing outside of my comfort zone in a bad way, doing things I shouldn't. And if you can just buy into the team first mentality, not worry so much about yourself, and that you're just working as a collective, things will work out for you in the end. I really did find that the more I cared about how well our team did each night, how well I played defensively, the rest of it kind of took care of itself.
You turned pro kind of when analytics really started taking off, whether we're talking Corsi or whatever. How much emphasis was put on that as opposed to maybe necessarily the wins and losses?
I'll say I'm glad that that stuff kind of came in as late as it did in my career because it kind of flustered me on how it was used and how much coaches valued it. And I know there's value in it, absolutely. I think at times, though, it's easy for people to just look at numbers and base their judgment off that on a guy or who to put in that night. And it gets really confusing. And I think hockey, it needs the human element and guys who have been around the game to know that there's more than just their stats in a night, how much they skated, what their work output was, how many shots they had on net. There's so many factors go into it, and they can be a very valuable tool. I just hate to see when in some parts of my career where the numbers mattered more than just what they were seeing on the ice.
In your last couple years playing, iPads kind of came in vogue on the bench. Was that something that you found helpful or hurtful to your game in particular?
I found it very helpful simply because I had a weird habit of forgetting what happened the play before. Literally, as I got back on the bench and like what just happened, it's the way I played the game my whole career. So it's nice at times just reach back, boom, 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 find your clip, and like, okay, now I see what happened. That's it's probably not the same for everybody, but I thought it was super valuable just like reach back there and see, or what did I not see on that play and why'd that happen? And to get it right away, okay, boom, now you're right back in the game. You have a little bit more knowledge.
I have to admit, I'm a little bit of an old school person that I would be okay if those iPads weren't allowed. Because I think in some ways it creates what I would say like an unfair advantage because you're
Yeah.
getting this instant analysis and it kind of takes away, I think, from the natural mental flow of the game.
It's also weird to watch an NHL game and they focus in on a player and he reaches back and grabs an iPad and just starts flipping through video in between a shift. I don't know. It is strange. And yeah, you're getting real time feedback instantly. But on the flip side, you can go in the locker room in between periods and basically rewatch the whole thing. So I've seen it all. I've seen like they'll have the TVs basically mounted in the floor of the bench. So you can kind of look back and watch it, or you can grab the iPad. So it's a weird thing that's kind of transitioned in hockey.
For you, who are the most influential coaches on your career that you felt really helped get your game better?
Oh boy, I had a lot. You can kind of go throughout, and I'd say that again, I was fortunate, like with my training staff. Same thing with coaches. I still look back at my time in Colorado with Greg Cronin and Aaron Schneekloth. Part of it was the captainship, but also the work they put in throughout the course of the season with me individually changed my game for the better. And I learned how to play defense in those years the right way. And admittedly, times where Cronin and I wanted to go toe to toe, I think, and he's old school, he was hard nosed, and we didn't always gel. But I look back and I was like, he was probably the best thing for my career. And the same thing with Schneekloth. They were a good duo together between a head coach and a defensive coach. And really, throughout my time there, really transformed my game.
For you personally, what's it like to see Cronin finally get a shot at being an NHL head coach?
I couldn't be happier for him. I texted him after I got the news, and he's such a different coach. And for guys that have played with him, they kind of know that he's tough. There's no BS with him. And this is how you're going to do it. It's his way. And it doesn't jive with everybody. But if you buy into what he's preaching and you get on board, he will make you a better player. And he cares. He cares more than any other coach I've played for. So I couldn't be happier that he got a shot, and it's well deserved.
You played briefly in Germany. What was that like?
Oh, that was crazy. So I finished up my American League career over here in the States. I decided to retire and then started getting phone calls going to the KHL, the Swedish League, Germany, basically all over. And I don't know, I kind of swore off Europe throughout my career. So I was like, I keep getting calls throughout the year. I say no, I say no. I start a job and teams keep calling. So this team in Germany, I had played with 5 or 6 guys in that team. So they're calling me individually, like, hey, we're making a playoff run. We need defensemen. Can you come over? And sure enough, they finally got me to go over. And it was probably some of the most fun hockey I've ever played. So different, the culture, the hockey itself. And then it mixed in with playing with guys who I had already played with in the past. So it was a ton of fun and got a nice little Europe experience over there for 2 months.
So what was the German beer like?
Strong. They said that, and I didn't really take it to heart. And all of a sudden, you get those giant glasses they have, and they hit a little bit different. They're a little bit stronger than you're used to.
Did you have a chance while you were over there to be a tourist at all and kind of just see the country a little bit?
I did, and I did because I knew my time there was so short. So on every off day, it was like, I'm in Germany for 2 months. I'm playing hockey. My family's over here. Let's go tour the site. So we just jumped in the car, and where we were in Germany too, in Straubing, was kind of the southeast corner of Germany. So we're close to Austria. So we got to go to Salzburg, the Austrian Alps, and we just get in the car and kind of jet around. And it was a blast.
Did you ski while you were in the Alps?
We did at the end of the season. Our end of the year party was in the Austrian Alps, and hadn't skied in a while and knew I was going back to work. So I said, let's let her rip. And I got to the top of the mountain after 2 gondolas and sat there for about 15 minutes deciding whether I was going to go down. It's a little bit different than the old hills they have in Minnesota.
That's pretty cool that you get a chance to go do that because not everybody gets a chance to go play internationally and get paid for it.
No, I know. They show up, they hand you keys to a car, keys to a house, got to basically cover yourself for food. And the rest of it was just playing hockey. And it was a fun team, making a fun run in the playoffs. It really couldn't have gone any better. It was a fortunate situation I stepped into, but I had a really good time over there.
What was behind your decision to hang up the skates?
A lot went into it. 10-year career. I think part of it's the American League is a grind. When you're in the American League, you're bouncing around a lot. You start mixing in a wife and kids. Even my last year in San Jose, I signed with San Jose. And she's like, we're going to California again. It's like, yeah, didn't you like it? She's like, yeah, I just don't like getting out there and bringing all of our stuff. So it takes a lot of work to start moving a family around in the American League. And there was that, a couple bad injuries at the end. And then ultimately, I knew it was time and knew I was going to have to work after hockey. And I kind of just want to get started on that next chapter and start a new challenge.
Speaking of the next chapter and new challenge, what are you doing now?
I landed in commercial insurance, which is definitely a challenge, completely new. Playing hockey for 10 years, like, what did I go to college for? What am I supposed to be doing? So spent last year kind of figuring that out and got started and about a year in, and I learned a lot this last year. It's so different, but I do like the challenge. It's a competitive industry and I've been enjoying it so far.
Because the hockey player's day is very different than a normal 9 to 5 day, was that transition for you a little difficult?
Oh man, you talk about going from practicing for an hour and going home and have the entire day off to do whatever you want to all of a sudden you're sitting at a desk from 9 to 5. Yeah, it's a shock. You kind of have to compartmentalize that and just know that you're doing a job, you're trying to provide for your family, and there's a bigger picture. But don't get me wrong, first couple months there sitting at a desk were eye-opening. And you're like, oh, should I go back and lace them up or should I stay at this desk? But no, now that I'm into it, I enjoy it and it's been going well.
Several of the hockey players that I've dealt with over the years were night owls. So working 9 to 5 is not a night owl type of schedule.
No, all that needs to be adjusted. Trust me, it's the sleep, you mix in kids and everything. Like I said, I'm pretty regimented in my day and how it's organized. So that part wasn't always too bad because I always did go to bed at a decent hour, but everything gets very structured. So you got to figure out and make your time to be with your family and get your work done.
On the flip side, is it nice not to have to constantly be packing bags and saying, oh, I'm going to go play in Norfolk or I'm going to go play in Syracuse today?
Yeah, you have no idea. I mean, that's another big thing, especially with the kids when they started getting a little bit older. That part got hard. It's like, all right, dad's going to be gone for 6 or 7 days. And all of a sudden, my daughter's out in the driveway crying. You're blessed because you're getting to play a game for a job, but it's also hard to be in a different city living and then you're going to a different city to play and nothing ever really feels like home. So to actually be in my own house and be able to do a few projects and be stable for a little bit, it's been enjoyable.
I can't imagine having to go on a road trip 3, 4 times over an 8 week period and just having to walk away from everything, that's got to be difficult.
It is. And I don't miss packing for some reason. That was always a big hang up for me, what I needed to bring. So now I don't have to pack as much, which is nice. Although I will say I did kind of become an expert, had a nice little list, threw things together, but it's nice to just sleep in your own bed.
What city was the worst hotel bed you ever slept in?
Bridgeport, Connecticut, no question.
And I
Yeah.
think I know the hotel you're talking about.
Yeah, safety was a bit of an issue. Just didn't quite feel comfortable there. And meals were a little rough. We always said a lot of jokes about the meals in the American League, but one of the funny ones I heard is like they call it the boil and press chicken. So we never really were sure how they cooked it, but this place that I'm talking about did it to a T where, yeah, it looks like chicken for your pregame meal, but the markings on it clearly are not from a grill. So teammates would make jokes. They just took the Sharpie out and drew the 3 lines on the chicken breast. And that's kind of what we were served at this hotel. So don't miss those meals either.
I just had to mute myself because I was laughing because I know exactly what you're talking about.
I think anybody that's played in Bridgeport knows exactly what hotel I'm talking about.
Mark, I want to thank you so much for coming on the I Play 2 podcast today and sharing your hockey memories, your high school football and hockey career, and all the funny stories. And next time I end up coming to St. Paul, I want a Juicy Lucy. Take care and thanks so much.
It's fun to kind of go back over and relive some of this stuff. We move on into real life, and it's nice to be able to talk about it. I appreciate you having me on.